Dr. Mason could hear his own footsteps pounding against the dirt road, but the woman ahead of him seemed to glide above the ground like a ghost. "Wait!" he called out, but she couldn't stop, because what was chasing them had been terrorizing the town for 3 days straight, and the woman was fighting a war that Dr. Mason never knew existed. But this story began 3 weeks ago. Silvertown sat in a forgotten corner of Texas, where dust devils danced between weathered wooden buildings, and the only saloon closed its doors at 6 sharp every evening. Dr. Ethan Mason, 34 years old, was the town's only physician. He lived alone, worked alone, and slept alone until that night. Mason had just seen his last patient of the day when he settled into his usual spot by the window, sipping his evening coffee. The clock struck midnight when he first saw her, a woman in white moving down Main Street. But this wasn't ordinary walking. Her feet barely touched the ground. Her steps made no sound. She moved like someone walking through a dream. Mason rose, pressing closer to the window. The woman was heading toward the edge of town, her eyes scanning left and right as if searching for something. Who could that be? Mason muttered to himself. The next night, she was there again. Same time, same route. This time, Mason worked up the courage to step outside, but by then, she had vanished. On the third night, Mason was ready. He laced up his boots, prepared to follow. When the woman appeared, Mason slipped out and trailed her at a distance. She was heading beyond the town limits, toward the old mill. Mason's heart hammered in his chest. What did this woman want? Who could she be? As they neared the mill, the woman stopped abruptly. She turned and looked directly at Mason. Mason's breath caught the woman's face. It was beautiful beyond words, but her eyes held a sadness so deep it seemed to span centuries. The woman tried to speak, but no sound came. Then she pressed her finger to her lips, a gesture for silence, and vanished. Mason stood there alone, his heart racing wildly. The next morning, Mason noticed something extraordinary at his practice. Ever since he'd started seeing the woman, no one in town had fallen ill. Usually, he'd see at least 5 patients a week, sometimes more. But since the woman's appearances began, not a single person had come to him sick. Strange, Mason thought. That evening, he spoke with Jeremiah, the town barber. Jeremiah, have you noticed? No one's been sick for 3 weeks now? Jeremiah stroked his beard thoughtfully. You're right, Doc. Seemed odd to me, too. Usually this time of year we're dealing with fevers and chills, left and right. Anything else different? Anything unusual? Jeremiah paused, considering. Well, I have been hearing strange sounds at night. Mason's ears perked up. What kind of sounds? Like something struggling, fighting, coming from far off. Maybe from the mountains. That night, Mason couldn't sit still. He waited by his window, watching for the woman. When midnight struck and she appeared, Mason was ready. He followed her again, but this time he was bolder. The woman passed the mill and headed toward the mountains. That's when Mason heard it, a distant growling, horrible, inhuman sounds. The woman stopped, turned back. She saw Mason, and this time, panic crossed her face. She began to run. Mason ran after her. This was the moment we saw at the beginning of our story. Mason running, the woman moving ahead like a phantom, and behind them. A shriek pierced the night. Terrifying, throat-rending sound. Mason turned, and what he saw filled him with horror. The size of a large dog, but it wasn't a dog. Its eyes glowed red, saliva dripping from its fangs. And it was heading straight for Mason. The woman suddenly stopped, spun around. In her hand was something Mason had never seen before. A long, silver blade. When the creature attacked, the woman was ready. The battle was brief, but fierce. The woman moved as if she'd been fighting these creatures for years. She wielded the blade with expertise, anticipating the creature's every move. Finally, the beast collapsed, its red eyes beginning to dim. The woman, breathing heavily, turned to Mason. This time she spoke. 3 years, she said, her voice hoarse and weary. 3 years I've been fighting these things every single night. Mason stared in amazement. You can speak?" The woman smiled bitterly. "I can speak, but no one believes me." "I'm Ethan Mason. Who are you?" "Clara Whitmore. I live alone in these mountains." Mason hadn't heard the name. Why? Why do you live alone?" Clara sat down heavily, exhausted from the fight. "Because I am different. I can see these creatures. They come down to town at night, making people sick, weakening them. I try to stop them. What are these things? I don't know where they come from, but they started appearing 3 years ago. I've been fighting them every night since." Mason knelt beside her. "All by yourself?" Clara nodded. "No one believes me. They say I'm crazy. They say I'm seeing ghosts. That's why I left town." "I believe you," Mason said. Clara looked up in surprise. "Why?" "Because for 3 weeks no one's been sick, not since you started coming around." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Someone noticed," Mason extended his hand. "You're not alone anymore." That night, they walked back to town together. For the first time in 3 years, Clara felt safe. The next night, Mason joined Clara on her patrol. This time, there were 2 creatures, but together, they handled them easily. Days passed. Clara began staying at Mason's house. The townspeople were suspicious at first, but when Clara started helping heal sick children, hearts began to open. Mason began teaching Clara medicine. Clara taught Mason how to fight the creatures. 6 months later, the sign outside Mason's practice read, "Dr. Ethan Mason and Clara Mason, Family Medicine." Yes, they had married. A quiet ceremony witnessed only by Jeremiah and a few close townspeople. Clara no longer patrolled alone at night. Mason was beside her, and strangely, the creatures were becoming fewer and fewer. "It's like," Clara said one night, "love frightens them away." Mason smiled. Maybe it does. The town was safe now, not just from creatures, but from loneliness. Because sometimes to find your guardian angel, all it takes is the right person to see them. And sometimes the greatest miracle is simply having someone truly listen. If this story whispered something to you about unseen heroes and the power of quiet love, then you're in the right place. Here at Western Romance Stories, we tell tales of forgotten hearts and hidden courage. Because sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin where no one is watching. Subscribe so you don't miss more stories like Clara and Ethan's, because every heart has a guardian angel. You just need the right eyes to see them.